Hey guys, this is Davin from Homi Dropt, the good doggo, and I'm here to talk about my favorite deck this set, Natura Sword.
Bow before the Forest King!
So this deck, it's really flexible, but it's mainly a mid-range deck, but you can be flexible with how you play it, whether you choose to control the board and go on to later turns to do most of your damage, but you do also have cards that let you chip in some of that early damage to go a bit aggro, so where your opponent kind of has to deal with the board, so you can take control of the game. So we're going to go and talk about the Natura Sword list that I have here. So we're going to talk about the deck, but the first thing off is that we're going to need to talk about the token that the deck revolves around, which is the Natran Great Tree token. It's a 1-cost amulet that when it leaves the field, you draw a card and then you discard a card. And then you're going to activate it, pay 1 to just bury it manually so you can proc the effect. So whenever it leaves the field, whether it be when it gets destroyed, banished, even if you bounce it somehow, you can activate the effect. So this deck is going to revolve around 2 main cards. The first is Baleon Sovereign Light. He's a 3/3/3 that evolves for 1 with Ward. And Fanfare, he can put a tree onto either your field or EX area. And then when you do evolve him, he lets you look at the top 4 cards of your deck and lets you put up to 2 natural cards that you find from them into your EX area, and then you bot deck the rest. And then he also has his activated effect where he can banish 2 trees from your field, and he can select a natural fall in your field, including himself, to give it +2 attack. So he's just a really good card when you just want to like look through your deck for like any of the pieces you might want. He's also just good if you had a natural card from the previous turn, just activate his effect to give the pre-existing follower some attack for a little extra damage. And then he also has spell associated with them. King's Might, a 3-point spell where when you play it, you can engage 2 trees. It costs 2 less, so it's a 1 cost. And then if you have a Baleon on the field, it costs 1 less. So you potentially be free where you select an enemy follower in the field and you can deal it 4 damage. So this works really well with them because you can play King's Might, engage 2 trees, and since you have Baleon on the field, it'll be free, deal 4 damage or something on the field. And then since Baleon just wants you to banish 2 trees, you can just banish those 2 engaged trees to give a natural follower +2 attack, and then you proc your trees twice since they were banished to draw and discard twice. The other big card of the deck is Mistalina, Forest Princess. She is a 6/4/6 with Storm. On Fanfare, she plays the Princess Strike from your cemetery and just plays it for free. And what that Princess Strike is, it's a 1-cost spell, quick, where you just deal 2 damage to an enemy follower in the field. But if you have a Mistalina on the field, it deals 6 damage. You can play the Princess Strike early on just to get into the cemetery so that when you do play Mistalina, you're able to play it. And if you don't have any time to play the Princess Strike, you can always discard it off a tree so that when you play Mistalina, you do at least get her Fanfare effect of playing the Princess Strike. And back to Mistalina. So she plays the Princess Strike from your cemetery for 0. Then her other effect is that you activate, engage 2 trees, and then she gets +3 attack, and then she heals your leader 2 defense. So after proccing it once, she becomes a 7/6 with Storm, and it's not all once per turn. So if you're somehow able to get rid of the trees, let's say with Baleon's effect, you could get 2 more attack. And then if you are able to get 2 more trees on the field, you can activate her effect again to gain +3 and heal 2. So those 2 cards are your big pieces of the deck. So we can just talk about the rest of the cards. So there's the 1 play point neutral, 1/1/2 colorful cook that lets you put a tree onto your field or EX area and heal 1. And then last word, discard a natural card, draw a card. So she's just one of your ideal turn 1 plays, but she lets you decide to whether put a tree onto your field or EX area. And generally you're going to be putting a tree onto the field just so that when you do play Baleon, you can put another tree on board just so that you have the option of using Baleon's effect to give another natural card +2 attack. But you can put it in your EX area because there is another card that can use trees from the EX area, but generally you'll put them onto the field unless you're planning for other things that you want to do with your board that you need the space for. And that's the thing with this Natura deck is that you do need to be mindful of your board space because most of your effects want at least 1 or 2 trees on board, so that leaves you with not a lot of room for followers. So when you do play followers that generate trees, you need to be mindful of where you're putting the trees, whether it be in the field or EX area, so that you do have the space just to play them all. But back to Colorful Cook, she's just a very good card for all Natura decks. And then her last word's also very good. I also play a 2F made later. It's just a 1/1/1, evolves for 2. And then on evolve, she just searches your deck for a follower with evolve and add it to your hand. If you don't have a Baleon in hand, you could just search for a Baleon. That's usually what I do. Otherwise, we do play Layout and Octress, so you can search for those 2 if you feel like the current matchup you want those. But yeah, Midlayer is just a general good searcher. Next is the 1-cost spell Tempered Ether, which puts a tree onto your field in the EX area. Play a 3F. It's very good. It just sets up your board for future turns when you need the trees. And then next up is the 2-cost 2/3 neutral follower Desert Pathfinder, where Fanfare you can put a tree onto your field or EX area. Then if there are at least 5 natural cards on your field and or in your EX area, including him and the tree he makes, then you can look at the top 3 cards, reveal a natural card and add it to your hand. This is just a very good card. You could just play it on turn 2 raw. You might not not get to search, but it's a body and a tree. And if you do play him on turn 2, if you're going second and he survives, you can play Bailey on turn 3, evolve him, and then pop 2 trees to give the Desert Pathfinder +2 attack. So he becomes a 4/3 that can attack. But yeah, he's just a very good top deck searcher and a tree generator. The next Natura card is Lupine Axeman, a 2/2/3, where on Fanfare, you can put a tree on your field or EX area, and then you can activate, engage this card, and any number of trees on your field, and then you can select an enemy follower on the field, deal it damage equal to the number of trees that you engage this way. So Lupine Axeman is just another tree generator, but he's also very good with dealing with early followers. So if you play him on turn 2 after playing either a tree generator, whether that be Tempered Ether or Colorful Cook, you can play Lupine Axeman, put the tree onto the board, and then you could tap him and those 2 trees to deal with 2 damage to something on board, which for the most part will deal with, if you're going first turn 2, it will deal with basically anything that your opponent plays on turn 1, and even going second, it'll still get rid of a lot of things. And then there's also Swift Tigress, a 3/4/3, where on Fanfare you can engage a tree and just gives her Storm. Just a very simple card. It just lets you push damage a bit, so it makes your Mistelina turns a bit easier to close out the games with. Like, even if you're not able to get the Storm damage, it still has Storm, so you can kill a follower if you need to, but she's just a very good generic card. And then there is the neutral Natura card, Viridia Magna, a 4/0/4 with Rush, Assail, and Bane. So she's very good at just getting rid of annoying followers that like your opponent may have just left standing that you don't want to deal with next turn. But then also she has a Last Words, banish a tree from your field or EX area, put this card onto its owner's field, engage, and evolve it. But if you didn't evolve it, you banish it. When she does evolve, she's just a ward with Last Words heal 2, but she's a 4/4 now. So this is the only card that really interacts with trees in the EX area. So when you do use her Last Words effect to banish a tree, you want to be careful where you banish it from, because if you banish it from the field, you'll get the tree proc to draw and discard, but then you might not be able to play some of the effects you want next turn. So like I've had a few times where I've played a Viridia Magna and I want to play like a Baleon or Mistelina, which needs 2 trees, and I only have 2 trees, so I banish a tree in the EX area just so I'm able to do the follow-up turn. But sometimes I've also just banished a tree on the field just because I need the draw and discard. So she's flexible that way. You just have to be mindful of whether you want to get rid of the tree from your field or EX area, depending on what you want to do on later turns. And then we also have a 2 of Octress, 2/2/2. You can evolve her for 2, but you can also evolve her for 0 if your opponent has at least 10 cards in their cemetery. And then on Fanfare, she banishes the top 2 cards of their deck. She does also have an activated effect where you can pay 8 to select a card in an opponent's cemetery and play it for 0. So that rarely, if ever, comes up, but there is a funny loop you can do with it where if your opponent plays a Dimension Shift and they're not floating any play points, you can just keep looping the Dimension Shift by paying 8 and just attacking for 4 every turn. Very, very improbable to come up. But when she does evolve, she lets you steal an opponent's card from the cemetery and put it in your EX area. And then as long as your opponent has 10 cards in your opponent's cemetery, any card that you play from the EX area costs 2 less. So generally, when you evolve her, your opponent's going to have at least 10 cards. Be mindful that when you do evolve, if they have exactly 10 and you steal a card, they'll be at 9, so that you won't get the reduction. So generally, you want your opponent to have 11 just so you can activate it when you do steal. So when you take cards, generally, I always just take removal just because that's usually what I need at the moment. But also there are moments where specifically against, say, Machina Abyss, where you might take their mono or their alpha drive just to limit their options just because they recur from the cemetery. But also, since Baleon's effect put cards into your EX area and you have cards that can generate trees in your EX area, Octress does discount those cards too. So she's just very good there too. There's also a Leod in here, a 2/1/3. He evolves for 2. And while this card is reserved, he has Intimidate and Aura. So your opponent has no way to interact with it except by using an AoE effect, whether that be something like Nemesis Decree or like Crimson Meteor, just something that hits AoE that doesn't care. But his other effect is that at the start of your end phase, you select an enemy follower in the field and deal it 1 damage. And then when you do evolve him for 2, you can select an enemy leader or an enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage. So he's just a good way to like deal with board, because sometimes when you use your removal spells, whether it be Princess Strike or King's Might, you might leave a follower with 1 defense. Leod would be able to clean it up at the end phase. If you play him on like 2 and then evolve in the next turn, it's 4 damage because you can attack with the Leod and then use his evolve effect to deal 2 damage to the enemy leader. So it's just a bit more chip early on so that your Mistelinas or like Swift Tigresses have an easier time of going for the kill. And he's just flexible in that you don't have to leave him standing, because sometimes when you just leave him standing, you're dealing with the board board, sure, but then he also is taking up a slot where you could just attack with him and then your opponent will have to deal with him. Otherwise, he's just going to stand again and deal with the board and keep attacking. And then our final card, we have Trail of Light, 2 play point spell, where when it's discarded, you draw a card, and you can hard cast it for 2 to draw a card. So ideally, if you just have it in hand and you need to get rid of a tree, it's your first target to get rid of, just to get that extra draw, just so that you can keep a good hand size. Because if you're just proccing the trees normally, you're going hand neutral. With Trail of Light, when you discard it, you'll be able to go hand positive. So that is the list for Natura Sword. It is, I would consider, a mid-range deck where you just want to play followers and keep dealing with the board until you can get in with either Mistalina or Swift Tigress to just go in, deal damage, and force your opponent to deal with them, or if they don't have a way to outright kill you, to ignore your board. This deck also does have quite a bit of planning you have to do depending on what you want to do and like what the current board state is, because since you need trees for a lot of these effects, you can decide whether you need to keep them on the field or if you're able to get away with paying 1 to activate their effective area for the drawn cycle if you really need it. Like with Balion's effect to banish 2 trees, I feel like if you aren't able to get immediate value off it, you might want to just not use it, just so that you can have those trees on board to activate other effects. So it's just a lot of planning and decision making with the deck that you need to be mindful of, and it's one where you kind of need a lot of practice with. The use of the trees is also a big factor in your decision making, because once you do discard something, you're not getting it back. You just have to be careful of like what you're okay with getting rid of when you do have a tree activate, or when you do get rid of a card, think about if you may need it in the current matchup or not. It's just a lot of decision making in the deck where if you're not careful, you may accidentally discard a card that you may need in the future. Or you may, if let's say if you have a Princess Strike in hand and you don't discard it, but you never have time to play it, you may not want to play Mistalina then, because then you won't get the full value over fanfare to play the Princess Strike for free. So like you might want to discard a Princess Strike if you don't foresee yourself playing it early on, just so that Mistalina can activate her effect. And another thing with the deck is that Maid Leader Evolve is the only card that searches your deck, so it's the only time that you'll be able to shuffle your deck. So if you do Balion and you see cards that you want to see, like let's say you see 4 natural cards, you can only pick 2 of them, the other 2 will go onto the bottom of the deck, so you will probably never see them again unless you get all the way down, or you somehow have the Maid Leader Evolve still to shuffle your deck just to have a chance of seeing them again. But once you get used to how the deck works and everything, I think it's just a very strong deck that can deal with most boards, and it's just very good. So with this deck, there aren't really any major combos you can do. Most of the combos that you have with this deck are built up over multiple turns, whether that be spending trees to make board space, or just generating trees for later turns, or trying to dig for certain cards with your trees. So there aren't really any major combos, but it's just a bit of planning for later turns, like just keeping trees for Mistalina, or generating trees onto the board specifically so that you want to like activate Balion's effect or Levine Axeman's, stuff like that. But generally, your opening hand goes a lot into that, and depending on what you see and matchup, it'll determine what you do with it. So like if you're going against something like Machina Abyss, which has like a lot of bodies, ideally you want to see your removal, whether that be Princess Strike, King's Knight, your Leods to deal with the board, your Levine Axeman to deal with the board. But ideally you always want a 1-drop tree generator, whether that be Tempered Ether or Colorful Cook. You could also, if you're okay with it, you can also keep Maid Leader, because then Maid Leader can search for your Balion, which will let you get other cards to expand your options. You'll also ideally want a 2-turn tree generator, so like either Desert Pathfinder or Lupine Axeman, just so that you can have trees on board to have options with, so that if you do have a Balion in hand, you're able to activate him immediately. So, or if you're going against like a slower deck, you can get like a tree generator, and then if you have a Swift Tigress in hand, you can keep that just so that you're able to play that immediately if you think you can get away with dealing that damage early on. But those are just some of the things you want in your opening hand. Ideally, it's a sword deck. You ideally want a 1-2-3 curve just for your early hand, just so that you're not falling behind on tempo. And that's Natura Sword, which is, you can see the deck list right now. I love the deck. It's great. It's really fun. This is Davin, signing off.